Hi, my name's Emma Jones. This is my project for the ICS class. My presentation today will be on what actually goes on in a funeral home. I've worked there previously, so I kind of know some of the weird ins and outs of the profession. The first slide is we drive minivans, not hearse everywhere. People often think that funeral directors drive hearse everywhere, but actually on retrievals, when picking up people from crime scenes and stuff like that, you won't see a hearse arrive. A hearse is only used for more professional settings, as in like the funerals, services, things like that. When you see a person in an open casket, they usually have a very calm composure. It sometimes can take quite a bit of work to get to that point, depending on who, or I should say how or what happened to them, can significantly determine how or what needs to be done to them. But some of the things that can take place are plugging of the nose, the mouth, sometimes even the ears, with cotton or glue, things like that, to make sure that there's no leaking, because it'd be really gross. And sometimes what we use to do that is going to the drugstore and picking up super glue. We've used super glue to glue the mouths shut. Another funny trick of the trade is to take a hairband and put it around their fingers to keep their hands together in a peaceful way. There's always the thing of a funeral can be very, very expensive, or any services for that matter. So if unfortunately the need ever comes up for one, people should check around, because as you can see here, between Costco, Amazon, and Overnight Caskets, which is an online company, there's significantly different prices for the same casket. These are all for a wooden velvet-lined casket. None of these are too drastic in price change, but some of them can range up to like $10,000 different, at the very most. But it's still worth checking out. And the other thing is to research your casket, or what necessarily you're buying, because a protective casket is one that includes a rubber gasket all the way around it, to keep the body safe from the outside environments, basically to try and stop decay, which ironically it makes it perfect for a certain kind of bacteria to attack the body. It gives it the perfect environment. And this kind of bacteria basically turns any of the soft tissue into mush, and it gives the inside of the casket a swampy consistency almost. So most funeral companies and funeral directors will recommend not getting that, or not storing the body in that for long periods if there's going to be a casket and a wake and things like that, because it can happen fairly quickly. The other thing that can happen is exploding caskets. If you use a protective casket, as the body begins to break down, there can be methane gases can build up and cause exploding casket syndrome, which is pretty much where the gases build up so much that it can blow the lid of a coffin off, or even the door to a crypt, depending on how strong it gets. Because of this, some companies invented the burping casket, which allows small amounts of gas to be released so that gas buildup doesn't happen to that extreme. It's only small amounts and it's released as it builds up, so it's okay. On the subject of exploding, I actually know a guy who he ended up passing away because if a pacemaker is left inside of a body when it's cremated, the batteries inside of a pacemaker, because they are meant to last for so long, they are more toxic than your average battery, and the heat from the crematorium can cause them to explode and even go as far as to like blow up the building. So I actually know a guy who was killed in a crematorium exploding accident. But because of that, it has now become very common practice, if not mandatory, to remove all pacemakers. It happens with older pacemakers versus newer ones. But it's still not worth taking the risk. For most people, it's just a matter of removing it. And I come from a small town. The funeral directors I worked with, we all were helping lift and retrieve bodies, things like that. Dressing, everything like that was dealt with by everybody because it was a small building, it was a small community. But in bigger cities, it is sometimes not even known for a funeral director to see the dead bodies. It's not common because they tend to a funeral director tends to just deal with the paperwork. Where somebody, especially if you have a large enough company, somebody more specialized will deal with the bodies and preparations. So the need isn't really there. There's actually theatrics to it. One of the main things is in mortuary science schools, they will actually teach color theory and stage lighting, because when presenting an open casket, especially for a service, you need to make this person who is no longer alive seem alive. So using red makeup or more red makeup to give their skin a healthy glow, using red lighting to make them seem more alive. There's a lot of added things than just making the person look nice. The environment around them is very important for this too. About 90% of funeral homes, depending on how long after the person passes away that the funeral takes place, they will try and avoid having outdoor funeral services, especially with an open casket, because that's kind of a thing of the trade, is to avoid having open casket funerals outside because it just never looks good. People don't like to see their family member that way, so we tend to try and avoid it. Formaldehyde may be on its way out. It's been commonly used for years for embalming services. People still do it, but embalming itself is on its way out. People tend to go more the natural way of like cremation, things like that. Not preserving a body in its current state. Which is good because formaldehyde has recently been found to cause worse symptoms than was previously assumed. It used to be thought of, to cause some skin irritation, maybe some sinus problems if you're breathing it for a long time. But it's actually been found that long-term exposure, such as embalmers and morticians, people who are handling this stuff and being around it a lot, are at a higher risk of cancer and leukemia. So formaldehyde isn't the best anymore. Unfortunately, that romanticized idea of being buried underneath your favorite tree isn't actually technically allowed. The regulation for burying bodies beneath trees is it has to be at least 4 feet away from the trunk to make sure that the tree and its root system aren't going to be harmed by the decaying body. Which, I mean, is good because most people who are being buried underneath a tree don't want to kill the tree. But Interestingly, if you want to plant a tree on top of somebody's grave, that is perfectly fine because the roots will grow around the tree versus being cut into to have the body buried or be poisoned by the toxicity of the body. It usually, by the time a small tree's roots would reach down that far, the body will have decomposed enough that it won't harm the tree anymore. The chemicals in it will have dissipated. I have been very lucky. My friends and my family all understand the aspects of the job, but it can be very difficult on relationships because most of the time you are on call 24/7. You need to be able to answer the phone and drive to go pick up a body when the police or the fire department or somebody calls for a retrieval, which means that you could be on a date, you could be at a family gathering, you could be at the doctor's office. You need to be available at all times. And there's also the aspect of you have to be sober because you have to be able to drive, so you can't drink, really. And I mean, it's not like you're on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Like, they wouldn't ask that of one individual. It's usually split up. At my old job, it was usually like 2 nights, and then another person would take care of it 2 nights, and then everybody would trade off. Especially in a small town, you don't get too many late night calls, but there's been a couple where it's like, 3 a.m., hey, we got somebody, we need you to come and get them. It's like, oh no, I really don't want to get up and go and do this right now. I want to just go back to sleep. So, this is kind of gross, and I was surprised to hear about it because you'd think that there would be a different way of handling it. But when dealing with a body and embalming it, the person is drained of all of their blood and most of their bodily fluids to avoid decay from them. That blood and fecal matter and all of those things, they don't go into a biohazard bag or are taken care of really in any special means, other than they are mixed with some chemicals to make sure that certain pathogens and certain germs and bacteria aren't passed on, and then it just goes right down the drain into the sewer system, which, if you think about it, isn't that bad. It's just kind of scary to be thought of because a person can, when going through an autopsy, depending on how big they are, they can go through as much as 120 gallons of different kinds of fluids that are all just going down to the sewer system. So some people don't like to think about that. Recycling metal. This is actually kind of cool in my opinion, which is that if somebody has a knee or a hip implant especially, they will take that implant and use it on, they'll recycle it. I mean, the family can always take it if they'd like, but the implant will actually be melted down and turned into street signs or car parts or anything else metal that they use recycled metal for. So driving down the road, you never think about it, but the street sign that you're driving past every day on the way to your house could be some old guy's hip or something like that. This is personally my favorite. We had one. Some funeral homes have dogs. We're going to be comforting people, and sometimes a puppy can be perfect for that. Ours was named Fedicus. He was a little tiny dog. He didn't wear a suit, unfortunately. But, yeah. So these are just a few things that most people don't know about the funeral service, or funeral homes, or funeral directors, or the life behind it all. So, thank you for watching my presentation.